going to be talking a bit about Paul, because most people, they don't accept Paul's writings, and then those who accept Paul's writings is a big misunderstanding on what Paul is saying, because many read Paul's letters and they are letters. They were letters Paul wrote. They are not scripture. So many read Paul's letters. First thing, they take them as scripture. Second thing, they misunderstand the things Paul says in these letters, and they have formed a whole doctrine on what they think Paul is saying in his letters. So we begin this in 2 Peter. So this is 2 Peter chapter 3, and we're going to read verse 15 and 16. And it reads, "And account that the long suffering of our Yah is salvation, even as our beloved brother Paul also, according to the wisdom given unto him, have written unto you, as also in all his epistles," which means letters, "speaking in them of these things, in which are some things hard to be understood, which they that are unlearned and unstable wrest, as they do also the other scriptures unto their own destruction." So Peter has just given a warning about Paul's letters. He never said Paul's letters are false. He never said that. He just said they are hard to be understood. And many read them and they twist them. Why? Because they are unlearned and they are not stable. They don't have a foundation. So if you don't have a foundation of an understanding of the foundation, or what people call the Old Testament, then you are not going to understand Paul's letters. Because Paul never once said in any of his letters that you do not have to keep the law anymore. And we're going to prove this. But before we do, we're going to watch a little small clip here and see what it said. And this is the views of Paul and Christianity from the Arabs.
The honor for Christianity, or whatever it is to be divided between Paul and Christ. And he said that the real founder of Christianity is not Jesus Christ, is Saint Paul. He wrote more books. The New Testament consists of 27 books, out of which more than half, 14, are written by this one man, Paul, Saint Paul, the self-appointed apostle of Jesus. Self-appointed. He didn't go and choose him. He chose 12. But the self-appointed apostle, Paul, he wrote 14 out of 27 books, more than half. And everything that the Christian is preaching today is not the preachings of Jesus, are not the teachings of Jesus, are the teachings of Paul. See, whenever we have an argument with a Christian, we are asking him, do you keep the laws and the commandments? So Jesus said so. One jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled. Do you keep the laws and the commandments? He said, whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments, or shall teach men so, shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Do you keep the laws and the commandments? He says, no. So why don't you? So he says, no, the law is nailed to the cross. So we are now living under grace. So where did you get that? So he says, Corinthians, Philippians, Galatians. So what's all that? Who's that? He says, this is Paul. Paul. So what did your master say? No, they don't talk about the master, Jesus. They don't talk about him. Paul. If they contradict you in anything, it's Paul. The real founder of Christianity is Saint Paul.
So I would say this. The real founder of Christianity is not Paul. It is the Romans. And they are the one who stuck the name Saint Paul, Saint John, and Saint this or Saint that. Those were not the names, first of all, and they were not so-called saints. So we shouldn't say they're not so-called saints, meaning because saints for the Romans or in Christianity is something different. than the saints of the Most High. So let's dive into this in terms of Paul. So let's start in Romans chapter 7. Let's see what Paul has to say here in Romans chapter 7. So we're going to read the first 3 verses. So it reads, "Know you not, brethren, for I speak to them that know the law." So first of all, Paul is speaking to them that knows the law. So if you don't know the law, Paul is not speaking to you. Because let's establish this first. Paul is speaking to those who know the law. How? That the law have dominion over a man as long as he liveth. For the woman which have an husband is bound by the law to her husband as long as he liveth. So once a woman has a husband, she is bound by the law to her husband as long as he's living. But if the husband be dead, she is loosed from the law of her husband. Verse 3. So then if, while her husband liveth, she be married to another man, she shall be called an adulteress. But if her husband be dead, she is free from that law, and that she is no adulteress, though she be married to another man. So Paul is here telling people about the law. This is the law on marriage, which is found in Deuteronomy 22, and we're going to go there shortly. So Paul is actually educating people on the law. So if Paul is educating people on the law, why would he be saying that the law is no more? So let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And we're going to read from verse 10 to 16. This is Paul speaking now again. "And unto the married I command, yet not I, but Yah, let not the wife depart from her husband." What did Paul just say there in verse 10? He is speaking unto the married. "And unto the married I command." But then he made himself clear. "Yet not I." So this is not coming from me. This is coming from the Most High. "Let not the wife depart from her husband. But, and if she depart, let her remain unmarried, or be reconciled to her husband, and let not her husband put away his wife." Or sorry, let not the husband put away his wife. So here we have it. Paul is telling you, these are not my words, but these are the words of the Most High. The woman should not depart. But if she does, she need to remain unmarried or reconcile to her husband. We don't see this being taught in Christianity today. We see even the pastors divorcing their wives and taking other wives. This is not what Paul said here. Verse 12. "But to the rest speak I, not Yah." So Paul is saying, no, I am speaking. These are my words that is following now, not the words of the Most High. "If any brother have a wife that believeth not, and she be pleased to dwell with him, let him not put her away." So these is Paul's word. So if you have a wife who is not a believer, Paul is telling you, as long as she be pleased to dwell with you, don't put her away. Verse 13. And the woman which have an husband that believeth not. So now this woman believes, but her husband does not believe. And if he be pleased to dwell with her, let her not leave him. So in other words, if he's doing the things or she's doing the things and not sinning and not, but they're just not believers, Paul is telling you not to put her away or telling her not to leave. These are Paul's words. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, or the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Else were your children unclean, but now are they holy. So what is Paul really saying here? So if that person is dwelling with you, don't put them away. In Paul's opinion, this is Paul, this is not the Most High, you probably, from your lifestyle, could win them to the Most High. Your children, your wife or your husband, your example of living could testify to them. Verse 15, but if the unbelieving depart, let him depart. A brother or a sister is not under bondage in such cases, but Elohim have called us. They want to go, let them go. That is what Paul is saying. For what knoweth you, O wife, whether you shall save your husband? And how can a wife save her husband? By living righteously, and the husband seeing it, and he wants it, and he starts to begin to live righteously as well. That is how a wife could save a husband. Or, how knoweth you, O man, whether you shall save your wife? Same thing again. The man living righteously, and he brings along the wife. She sees his example, and now she is willing to follow. That is how. So, let's go and see where Paul got this information from. Because remember, Paul said he was not speaking. This was Yah speaking. So this is Deuteronomy chapter 22. And we're going to read from verse 13. But remember, Romans 7 and and 1 Corinthians 7, they all said the same thing. You are bound to the law of your husband as long as he lives. So this is Deuteronomy chapter 22, and we're going to read from verse 13. If any man take a wife and go in unto her and hate her, and give occasion of speech against her, and bring up an evil name unto her, and say, I took this woman, and when I came to her, I found her not a maid. So maid here means virgin. So he took her, and he found her not a virgin. Then shall the father of the damsel, or the young lady, and her mother take and bring forth the token of the damsel's virginity unto the elders of the city in the gate. So the token of virginity was that white sheet that was spread, that when they had sex for the first time, and her husband broke and she bleeds, the blood will run on the sheet. That was what constituted a marriage. So if she was not a virgin, there would be no blood. So verse 16. And the damsel's father shall say unto the elders, I gave my daughter unto this man to wife, and he hateth her. Verse 17. And lo, he has given occasion of speech against her, saying, I found not your daughter a maid, a virgin. And yet these are the tokens of my daughter's virginity, and they shall spread the cloth before the elders of the city, and the elders of the city shall take that man and chastise him. Verse 19. And they shall immerse him in 100 shekels of silver, and give them unto the father of the damsel. So this um, this girl's father is now getting 100 shekels of silver. Why? Because he have brought up an evil name upon a virgin in Israel, and she shall be his wife. He may not put her away all his days. So this was his wife. She was a virgin. He took her virginity. And he now brought an evil report saying she was not a virgin because he wanted to put her away. So now the elders made the decision. They made the decision. It went to the elders. The token of her virginity went to the elders. They found she was a virgin. So now there is punishment for this man. But it does not end there. Verse 20. But if this thing be true, and the tokens of her virginity be not found for the damsel, so if it be true, so the first example, it was not true, and this was the punishment for the man that tried to bring up an evil name on a virgin in Israel. But now, if this thing be true, and the token of her virginity is not found for the damsel, verse 21, then they shall bring out the damsel out the door of her father's house, and the men of her city shall stone her with stones, that she die, because she have wrought folly in Israel, to play the whore in her father's house. So shall you put evil away from among you. So if this be true, and she was not a virgin, because Christianity does not teach this. They just say it's good to be a virgin, but your virginity is very important. That is what constitutes a marriage. We will get into that in another lesson. So, this young lady, if she was not a virgin, she is stoned. So, let's go further, because remember, we are proving what Paul said in Romans chapter 7, that a woman is bound to the law of her husband by the law to her husband as long as he lives. Then he said in 1 Corinthians that a woman shall not leave, but if she does leave, she is to remain unmarried or reconcile to her husband, not a different man. He went further in Romans 7, he called the woman, if her husband, she leave her husband and she goes to another man, she is now called an adulteress. That is what he said. So let's go on. Let's go to verse 25. No, sorry, verse 22. So verse 22. If a man be found lying with a woman married to an husband, then they shall both of them die, both the man that lay with the woman and the woman. So shall you put away evil from Israel. So if a man lies with a woman who is married, that is a death sentence. Verse 23. If a damsel that is a virgin be betrothed unto a husband, and a man find her in the city and lie with her, you shall bring them both out unto the gate of that city, and you shall stone them with stones, that they die. Now this is important, because she is betrothed, or what we will call engaged today. She's engaged to a man, but yet still she lie with another man, they will die. The damsel, because she cried not, so it was not rape, being in the city, and the man, because he have humbled his neighbor's wife. So there we go. Now remember, she was just betrothed or engaged. But here it says the man, because he have humbled his neighbor's wife. Why she called wife there? Because she is already promised to a man. Betrothed is also called marriage. No, the virginity have not been taken yet, but she is still counted as his wife. And where does this happen? So you shall put away evil from among you. So the Mosai see these things as evil. Verse 25. But if a man finds a betrothed damsel in a field, and the man force her, which is rape, and lie with her, then the man alone that lay with her shall die. So if a man rapes a woman, or the damsel, betrothed to a man, so she's engaged to a man, and it was rape, she cried out, it was rape, then the man alone shall die. Verse 26. But unto the damsel you shall do nothing. There is in the damsel no sin worthy of death. For as when a man riseth against his neighbor and slay him, even so is this matter. So the Mosai count this matter as when a man kills his brother or his neighbor. So there's no sin in this woman. And the other part of this is the man now that took her virginity is dead. So she will not be called an adulterer. The man is dead. So verse 27. For he found her in the field, and the betrothed damsel cried, and there was none to save her. So it was rape. She cried out, and no one saved her in time. There was no one to save her. She cried out. So this she shall live. Verse 28. If a man finds a damsel that is a virgin, which is not betrothed, and lay hold on her, and lie with her, and they be found, then the man that lay with her shall give unto the damsel's father 50 shekels of silver, and that is the bride price. Remember, he then have the father's permission, and she shall be his wife, because he have humbled her. He took her virginity, so he shall be her wife. Sorry, she shall be his wife. He may not put her away all his days. A man shall not take his father's wife, nor discover his father's skirt. Let me explain that, because men have more than one wife, so this is not necessarily a man's mother. So he is not to trouble any of his father's wives. That is the law. So we just read the law on marriage, or what constitutes a marriage. So this is what Paul was saying. A woman is bound to the man, or bound to her husband by the law as long as he lives. So if a man took your virginity, you are bound to that man as long as you live. You shall not leave him, and he shall not put you away. If you go on to another man, then you are called an adulteress. I know many would not want to accept that, but that is the law. And that is what Paul was quoting back in Romans chapter 7 and 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Paul quoted, and they used this particular thing as an example. So let's go back to Paul. Because remember, we are proving Paul's words. So let's go back to Romans chapter 7. Remember, many say Paul is a false prophet, as the Arabs say. Some say Paul was telling them not to keep the law anymore. So then wait in Romans 7 and 1 Corinthians 7, Paul is teaching, or remember, this is letters Paul wrote. Paul wrote these letters to these people, telling them about these laws. Why? But let's dig into this a little bit deeper. So we got Romans chapter 7, and we're going to read from verse 12 to 14. And this is Paul speaking in his letters. Wherefore, the law is holy, and the commandment holy and just and good. So Paul would have to be schizophrenic to be telling people not to keep the law anymore, but now he's telling them the law is holy and the commandments are holy and just and good. But let's carry on. Verse 13. Was then that which is good made deaf unto me? Yah forbid. So remember, he said the law and the commandments are holy and just and good. Now he's saying, was then that which is good made deaf unto me? Yah forbid. But sin. And what is sin? Sin is transgression of the law. So, but Paul is saying these things was not made deaf unto me. The law, the commandments was not made deaf unto me, but sin. Remember, sin is the transgression of the law. Let's continue. That it might appear sin, working death in me by that which is good. That sin by the commandment might become exceedingly sinful, because you cannot have sin unless you have the law or the commandment. But look what Paul says in verse 14. For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, sold under sin. So Paul just told you in Romans chapter 7 and verse 14, the law is spiritual, but I am carnal. But let's pick this up in Romans chapter 8, because people lie on Paul every day, and it's time we get this out there and get this straight. So Romans chapter 8, we're reading from verse 5, and we can read from 5 to 16. So Romans chapter 8, verse 5. For they that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh, but they that are after the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. So what did Paul call the law in chapter 7? The law is spiritual. So they that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh, but they that are after the Spirit mind the things of the Spirit. Verse 6. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. So what is Paul saying? Remember, he said the law is spiritual. To be carnally minded. Remember, Paul told you he was carnal. Sin is what works death in us. Sin is transgression of the law. But to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Verse 7. Because the carnal mind is enmity against Elohim, for it is not subject to the law of Elohim, neither indeed can it be. You see what Paul is saying? A carnal mind is enmity against the Most High, and it is not subject to the Most High's law, and neither can it be. This is Christianity. It is carnally minded. It is against the Most High. It is not subject to the Most High's laws, and it cannot be, because it is not of the Most High. Christianity is a man-made religion who takes Paul's words and twists them to suit their own way. Paul is telling you this right here in Romans chapter 8. For the carnal mind is enmity against Elohim, For it is not subject to the law of Elohim, neither can it be. But let's continue. So then, they that are in the flesh cannot please Elohim. So those carnal people who live in the flesh and live after the flesh and are not subject to the laws of Elohim, they cannot please Elohim. This is Paul. This is the same man that they said the law is done away with. But Paul is here preaching law. And he's telling you, without the law, you cannot please Elohim. Verse 9. But you are not in the flesh, but in the spirit. So he's telling you, the people he write this letter to, you are not in the flesh, but you're in the spirit. You are in the law. You are law keepers. If so be that the spirit of Elohim dwell in you, now, if any man have not the spirit of Yeshua, he is none of his. So anyone does not have this spirit in them, they are not of the Messiah. That's what Paul is saying here. They are none of his. Verse 10. And if Hamashiach be in you, or the Messiah be in you, the body is dead because of sin, but the spirit is life because of righteousness. You know, they told us we can't be righteous. The scriptures disagree. I have learned that in Christianity. Oh, we can't be perfect, but Matthew 5:48, be you perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Oh, there's none righteous. That is not what we read in. That is not what we read. That is not what the scripture says. But this is what Christianity tells you, because it is enmity against the Most High. It is a carnally minded religion. It cries down the law. It fights the law when the law is life. Verse 11. But the spirit of him that raised up Yeshua from the dead dwelled in you. He that raised up the Hamashiach from the dead shall also quicken your mortal bodies. His spirit that dwelleth in you. So he's saying the Father is going to do these things. He is who raised Yeshua from the dead. And quickened just means to bring back alive. So verse 11. But if the spirit of him that raised up Yeshua from the dead dwell in you, he that raised up Yeshua from the dead shall also quicken your mortal bodies, or raise up your mortal bodies, by his spirit that dwelleth in you. So as long as his law dwells in you, just as it dwelled in the Messiah, you know, the Christianity tell you, oh, the Messiah kept the law perfectly for you, so you don't have to do it. So you reject that spirit that was in the Messiah. So those of us, that spirit that was in the Messiah is in us, we are going to be quickened. We're going to be raised by that same spirit that was in the Messiah. The law. Remember, the law is spiritual. This is what Paul is talking. Verse 12. Therefore, brethren, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live after the flesh. For if you live after the flesh, you shall die. But if you through the Spirit do modify the deeds of the body, you shall live. Paul is very clear. For as many as are led by the Spirit of Elohim, they are the sons of Elohim. For as many as are led by the law of Elohim, they are the sons of Elohim. For you have not received the spirit of bondage again to fear, but you have received the spirit of adoption, whereby we cry, Abba, Father. Because Israel was adopted, Jacob fought against the angel, and his name was changed from Jacob to Israel. That is where the adoption happened. Jacob had 12 sons. This is where we get the 12 tribes of Israel. So this is where the adoption happened. So verse 16, the Spirit itself beareth witness with our spirit that we are the children of Elohim. So the law of the Most High is what Paul is teaching and preaching. These are the things Paul preached. So let's go to Romans chapter 10. And we can see something very interesting here. So verse 1. Brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to Elohim for Israel is that they might be saved. So this is Paul's prayer for Israel. For I bear them record that they have a zeal of Elohim, but not according to knowledge. So again, like the people today, God this, God that, God the third, God the Son of God, everything. He is in their lips, but is not in their hearts. So they have a zeal, but not according to knowledge. Verse 3, for they being ignorant of Elohim's righteousness, again, what is righteousness? For they being ignorant of Elohim's righteousness and go about to establish their own righteousness, all the laws are done away with. You just got to accept the Lord Jesus in your heart and you're saved. That is their own righteousness. That is not the righteousness of Elohim. Read it again. For they being ignorant of Elohim's righteousness and going about to establish their own righteousness have not submitted themselves unto righteousness of Elohim. They refuse to do it. For Yeshua is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone that believes. So let me pause, because this is where they will fall and butt their heads. For Yeshua is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone that believes. So before we go to verse 5, let me clear the statement. Remember, we read 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 15 and 16. Paul's letters are hard to be understood, and they that are unlearned twist these things to their own destruction. So let's go into Hebrews, because we're going to see what is this that Paul is referring to. So Hebrews chapter 10. We're going to read the first 10 verses. For the law, having a shadow of good things to come, but not the very image of the things, can never, with those sacrifices which they offer year by year continually, make the comers thereunto perfect. Verse 2. For then would they not have ceased to be offered, because that the worshippers once purged should have had no more conscience of sin. Verse 3. So it's going to get a lot more clear. But in those sacrifices, there is a remembrance again made of sin every year. So thus far, we got 3 verses, and they're talking about sacrifices. Verse 4. For it is not possible that the blood of bulls and goats should take away sin. So let's pause there. This is what was instituted in Leviticus chapter 4. The law of animal sacrifice for sin that the Mosai gave to Moses to give the children of Israel so that he would start killing them. So he allowed them to sacrifice bulls and goats as remission for sins of ignorance, because it was only for sins of ignorance. It's for when people broke the law and did not know or understand they broke the law that you could sacrifice a bull or goat for atonement. It was never for willful sin. You can read this in Leviticus chapter 4. So verse 3 again. But in those sacrifices, there is a remembrance again made of sin every year. Verse 4. For it is not possible that the blood of bulls and goats should take away sin. Verse 5. Wherefore, when he cometh into the world, he saith, sacrifice and offerings you wouldest not, but a body have you prepared me. So this is talking about Yeshua now. He came into the world and said sacrifices and offerings over the not. Verse 6. In burnt offerings and sacrifice for sin, you had had no pleasure. So animal sacrifice for sin was never pleasing to the Most High. It was a temporary setup. It was a temporary law. It was not one of the original laws. This is the law that came 430 years after. This is the schoolmaster that Paul was speaking about. The law of animal sacrifice for sin. Not all animal sacrifices. Because as we know, when we read, there were sacrifices that were pleasing. The aroma went up and they were pleasing to the nostrils of the Most High. But not animal sacrifice for sin. I reverse it again. In burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin, you hast had no pleasure. Verse 7. Then said I, lo, I come. In the volume of the book, it is written of me, this is Yeshua, to do your will, O Elohim. Verse 8. Above, when he said, sacrifice and offerings and burnt offerings and offerings for sin, you wouldest not, neither hadst pleasure therein, which are offered by the law. So this is the law that Paul is referring to. Not what you call the Mosaic law or the entire law. It is one particular law. Animal sacrifice for sin. This is the law Paul is referring to. Let's prove it. Verse 9. Then said I, lo, I come to do your will, O Elohim. He taketh away the first, that he may establish the second. He took away the first. What first? Animal sacrifice for sin, that he may establish the second. His own blood. So we don't have to kill animals today to be atoned or get remission for sin, because the Messiah did that once and for all. And verse 10, by the which will we are sanctified through the offering of the body of Yeshua HaMashiach once for all. So now we don't have to kill animals anymore. Why? Because the Messiah, he took away the first animal sacrifice for sin and established the second, his blood. By the which will we are sanctified through the offering of the body of Yeshua HaMashiach once for all. So we don't got to kill nothing no more. So this was the animal sacrifice for sin Paul is talking about, not the entire law. This is why Peter said Paul's letters are hard for some to understand. Who is unlearned, they would never get it. So back to verse 4. For Yeshua is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone that believes. The end of what law? The end of animal sacrifice for sin. That is what he was the end of, not the entire law. So Paul knows exactly what he's saying. So Yeshua was the end of the law of animal sacrifice for sin. That was the law for righteousness. Animal sacrifice for sin. Animal sacrifice for sin. So let me go go from verse 4 again. For Yeshua is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone that believes. For Moses describeth the righteousness which is of the law. No, he's talking about the entire law. That the man which doeth those things shall live by them. But the righteousness which is of faith, because now we got to believe that the Messiah died and we don't have to kill anything more. That law is gone right now. So the righteousness is of faith speaketh on this ways, saying not in your heart, who shall ascend into heaven, that is, to bring Christ down from above, or who shall descend into the deep, that is, to bring up Christ again from the dead. So look what Paul is saying. Verse 7. Or who shall descend into the deep, that is, to bring Christ up again from the dead. Verse 8. But what saith it? The word is nigh you, even in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith, which we preach. So we just showed you what Paul was preaching. The law. Understand? Paul was preaching the law. But let me show you, because this here is not even Paul. This was Moses that said this verse. Moses is the one who made the statement, not Paul. Paul just repeated Moses. So Deuteronomy chapter 30, we start at verse 11. And it reads, for this commandment which I command you this day it is not hidden from you, neither is it far off. It is not in heaven, that you should say, who shall go up for us to heaven to bring it unto us, that we may hear it and do it. Verse 13, neither is it beyond the sea, that you should say, who shall go over the sea for us and bring it unto us, that we may hear it and do it. Verse 14, but the word is very nigh unto you, in your mouth and in your heart, that you may do it. All praise to the Most High. So Paul in Romans chapter 10, that was not even Paul who said it. Paul was quoting Moses. But yet still people say that Paul said the law of Moses is done away with. Paul kept the law. Paul preached the law. So why would Paul then say to anybody that you should not keep the law of Moses is done away with? So all praise to the Most High. We try to keep these ones very short and precise, so people can watch in entirety and don't be too drawn out. So all praise to the Most High. We will continue this on another video.